Awesome, welcome to the Rhino Creativity course. This is the second video out of a series of 4 videos. This one is not only building off of the concepts learned in the first video, but putting it to practical use and seeing how these different techniques play out in practice. Okay, so you can see here, these are the 4 unique ways that you can build. I'm sure there's more, but to me, these are some of the fundamental ones that I use through a design process. And of course, it's going to change completely on what your project is. The first one we're going to go over is volume or carve, and this is really defined by mass and weight, heaviness, time, timelessness. So if you're doing a project that is working with those heavy themes, this could be a very good way to start to work through that design. In this technique, you're defining space by taking objects and subtracting it out of mass, which is extremely different than tectonics, which I'm titling structure here, which is made out of small elements. That is a very different gesture. Okay, so let's go over how you could start to think through mass and this volume and carve technique, which a lot of the times actually also has to do with topography and carving away. So I'm going to start here with an overall mass. Generic mass is just my blank canvas to work off of. And there's a number of ways that you can subtract element geometry, and I did want to cover some of those different ways to go about this. So the first one is the Boolean difference, and so this is a pretty common command, and in order to do that, you just type in Boolean difference, and it gives you prompts here. The first one is select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract from, so I want to subtract from this main base. Then I'm going to press space. Then I'm going to select surfaces or poly surfaces to subtract with. I'm going to click the item that I want to subtract from. You'll notice that it kept the geometry there, which sometimes you want, sometimes you don't, and then it subtracts what geometry you created. If we do this again, let's do this again, the Boolean difference, subtract from, you get a notification here that says delete input. Sometimes you do want to delete the input, and that way you don't have to select it. It's just automatically deleted. Another way that you can subtract geometry is using the trim function. I typically use the trim function more so when I have line work. So let's say I drew some line work in 2D here. And this, maybe I have something a little bit more intricate, or I have a lot of things that I've modeled in line work, and then I want to translate that into cutting an object. So let's say even if I had a series of stairs or something. So in the trim, you have to make sure that shaded is on in order for it to work. You notice I actually lost some of my line work, and I can, if I drag select, can select that line work. Once it's selected, I can hit Control T, which is trim, and then I can I can hit inside this circle here, and what you'll notice is there's a couple times where you have to click. So the first time it didn't trim it all the way. The second time it trimmed all the way here, and then I would have to trim inside here again. And then I have subtracted the geometry using the line and the trim function. Okay, and for this case, I'm just going to continue down and doing this, and I'm not worrying too much. I can hit the space command to repeat the command, and you can start to get the idea of this carving away that's beginning to happen. And you can keep playing with this too if you use the SketchUp technique that we went over in the last video. You can manipulate this geometry, and of course you don't have to. You don't have to create. It doesn't have to be a box. You can make more complex geometry using the SketchUp technique again. You can just continue to kind of play around with it here, and just kind of see what happens and what you can come up with. Just continue to play around with this, both in selecting the faces. So if I wanted to make this a little bit skinnier here, and then maybe I wanted to drop this down a little bit. Maybe you want to now make a ramp going there. You could select this, kind of like push this back. There's a lot of options you can play with. Second technique is the surface, and I usually use this when I'm doing really quick modeling studies. Almost think of it as using paper you're folding and just playing around and coming up with really quick concepts. This is not something I typically use for a more detailed and precise model. This would be more early on in the process where you're really not concerned about the micro details. You're just trying to get overall masses and maybe some concepts together. So let's go over how you could go about this. Now, I'll just start with a rectangle here. I'm not even going to be concerned about the size, and I'm going to type in planar surface. Let's just go over to a blank canvas here. And a helpful tip here is you can do zoom selected, and now I am fully zooming around that object. I use that very frequently. Okay, so we can just start as this is a base, and I'll just do Control C, Control V. I can slide this out. If I hold click, I can snap that tool. I can, if I hit Control, I can move this, the gumball around, and then hit rotate, and then rotate this 90 degrees. Again, there's lots of ways to do one thing. This is just a way that I like to work with manipulating geometry, and I find it really freeing as well. Again, using this SketchUp, what I call a SketchUp technique, at some point we just need to call it the Rhino technique, which is using this Control Shift, you can select the line work, and that just allows you to move these edges really easily. Another thing you can do is hit the scale 1D. I use this all the time as well, and you can move things around that way as well. So we have, very quickly, Control C, Control V, we almost have a house here. So like if we were to make, just a cube here, I could pretty quickly create a cube. Sometimes I turn off gumball so I can get the proper snapping without it getting in the way. Then we'll turn it back on. Let's say I want to make like a gable. I might just delete this, go Control C, Control V, drag, get the gumball over here, rotate this. Again, maybe not even worrying about the exact degrees. Using the mirror tool, I'm going to mirror this, and again, maybe you want to do kind of like a sawtooth roof thing. Maybe you want to have this dynamic porch where you're kind of pulling back an edge and like creating a porch here. Let's turn on gumball. And you can see that pretty quickly here. I can Control Shift gumball an edge, and like if I wanted to just cut this off, I could actually just extrude a new piece and then hit snap, and you'll notice it is a separate surface. And you can see very quickly you can get some pretty conceptual massing, little kind of napkin sketch ideas about, okay, I'm gonna have this indoor-outdoor space. Maybe it's protected in one area, but here it's not. I can go Control Shift, Control V, and I can, maybe define a kind of front porch that's protected. Maybe in my head I'm already thinking that this is gonna kind of become like a trellis. And this doesn't have to happen for like a tiny house. Like you can very easily do this as a tower just by like extruding geometry. And we're going to go over surfaces in more detail in the next video. But just to kind of get your head starting to think in that direction, you could very quickly start to think through forms using surfaces and this kind of like scaling technique. It's almost like a napkin sketch of what you can do, and you can just move these surfaces around. So hopefully that gives you enough of just a quick understanding of, oh hey, don't have to be super precise about this. I can just be really fluid and move things around and get kind of like a quick napkin sketch of what I could do, and then work from there and build in detail as you go on, as you start to develop the design. The last thing you want to do is spending a bunch of time modeling the first iteration of a design. You really only want to do that final modeling at the very, very end. In the beginning, you want to have tons of options to go through. So, I could just do Control C, Control V, move this over. I'm like, man, this roof, I'm not so into it. Gable, maybe not, and I could then take this and say, I actually want to do more of like this flat roof thing. And then I don't want to have, I want to actually have like a terrace upstairs. So have like a terrace upstairs, but oh wait, I need some enclosed space so I can get up and down. So then I can move this thing, bump that out. And then all of a sudden, like, these are so different designs. And at any point too, like if I want to develop this, like make it a little bit more realistic, I always can just take these surfaces and just extrude them a little bit. And now suddenly, pretty quickly you have like a realistic situation. And then you can set these materials. Material, set, use a new material, custom. Okay, let's just give it like this light blue. Maybe give it like a texture. And then give this like 50. Then we're going to give like some transparency, move this to rendered view, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, like I actually, like I'm working with something. I actually get some of my ideas out and can start working with that. I could just keep going. And you're like, flat roof is boring. Select this edge, move it up. Maybe you make like some big move that you're going like this, and you're just like, boom, whoa. And you're like, oh, well, this is kind of weird. I want this actually to kind of not go back to more towards that. I want like this big overhang. And then I can, again, take this, copy, paste, and then just keep iterating. All right, moving on. Let's just delete that. Move that over for now. Moving on, we have structure. And this is really another way of saying tectonics, which means you're building your model based off of pieces and fitting those pieces together. And this is some of my favorite type of architecture. I love when there's lots of wood pieces that overlap and connect to each other and make these intricate details. It excites me. I love the way that it can create light. I love the craft and the carefulness to it. And there's something that I just connect with on a very tactile level. And it's definitely a design preference of mine, is having these pieces interlocked together. So let's go through how we could think through this. So again, it's pieces, it's elements. And again, this might be in a more detailed part. It doesn't have to be, but it tends to be, you're making studs, it's more detailed, it's farther down the line of a detailed model, because you're modeling the elements and constructing them and thinking through not just massing an overall concept, but you're actually thinking of structure, which is the very thing that's going to hold up your project. So it is a little bit more detailed, but it can be a way to generate ideas and design intent. So to make this, let's just make kind of like a square thing. Let's do like 5 inches by 5 inches, and then take that and just extrude it. Let's do like an 8-foot kind of pavilion type of situation. You'll notice that it's not solid, so I can always come here and cap it. And we can just delete this for now. So this starts to get into the other technique that we're about to get into. But what you can do here is you can actually turn this into a block, and you're going to see in a minute why I want to do this and why this is so fun. So if I type in block, and those are not familiar with blocks or AutoCAD. If you are familiar with AutoCAD, it's similar to AutoCAD blocks. If you're not familiar with AutoCAD, blocks is another way. It's similar to SketchUp components. What blocks allows you to do is you edit one component and it edits every single component that you have copied, pasted of that component. Super confusing way of explaining it, but maybe let's make it a little bit more clear. Let's just array this object. So let's do a linear array, and it's array linear. I always get those mixed up. So select the object, and then let's just do 10 pieces, and let's do it 5 inches apart. No, 10 inches apart. Which would be 5 inches apart. And you'll notice, like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know what? I could do Control C, Control V again. Let's do 8 feet. I'm looking at this. I'm going to looking at this. I'm like, these look just a little chunky, right? You know, maybe I'm going to Control V, Control C. I'm gonna kind of like move these and then scale them. Going to make some like crazy trellis thing. And I do want these to line up, so there we go. Okay, so some trellis thing, and I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, you know, this just looks super chunky. I'm like not really into it. It's too chunky. So what you can do with this block is I can double click and you'll notice everything is grayed out except for the block that I'm working with. And like, let's say I wanted to make these proportions different. I can come in here and now I can manipulate this, and it will manipulate every single component that I have copied. Pretty cool. One thing to know is if I just rotate this, it's not going to change the orientation of the object. But let's say if I were to make a series of fins, like let's say a series of fins, what I can do is I can double click and I can rotate it, and now it's going to rotate every single object because it has a reference point and you're editing the relationship to that reference point when you double click it and you've activated the block. So if you just rotate it, it's not going to do anything. It's only once you've double clicked it. And let's say if I was like making some fins, I can Control Shift and then I could move this out and just keep messing with this and constructing with it. So again, this might be something that, you know, maybe I already have my surfaces and I want to actually just like put some studs on the surfaces. Again, you know, that's maybe where you're thinking about the structure as well. And so you could always come here and then maybe in the 2D view, I could make a stud. And that is a huge, that's more like a humongous beam. And then I could then take that, Control C, Control V, and start to populate it on the surfaces and start to create a skin. So it's not like you have to work in these things in isolation. It's almost like depends on where you are in the process and what kind of design you're going for. You might be going for this more for some fins along your design, like we were talking about, maybe making this into a trellis. I could like move that, and then I could take my surface, go back to shaded view, take my surface and move it back to this. And then I'm going to do a scale 1D to get this to the right height. Scale 1D is awesome, but I must say sometimes you can't get it to reference like what you need it to, but overall it works. You know, and then I'm like, oh, how am I going to model these things at this direction? Well, guess what you can do? You can Control Shift the edge. Then I'm going to extrude it like, I don't know, 4 inches. And then I'm going to select, and what's cool about that extrusion thing is it's now a separate surface. Like, that's super awesome. Now, this is interesting. So if I extrude here, that's fine. I mean, like, whatever, we're in like schematic design, but you'll notice that it's extruding along that a specific, what is it, the X axis, which again, in this stage, it's fine. And I can do like the linear array, but another way that you can extrude this surface, especially if it's at an angle, is you can hit offset surface. And that's going to, and you can decide the direction. So I can click this, it's going to decide the direction. So let's go in this direction. Then you'll notice now it's extruding it along that same, it's basically perpendicular instead of askewed. And then you can always Control Shift, and again, if I just move it on the gumball, now I'm skewing it. But what you can do is I can go Control Shift, drag, and then do that. Now I can go array linear and just kind of like approximate the spacing that I want. And then you can start to like mock this thing up. And again, I could always select this geometry and create a new material. I really should have made a separate video on just materials, but I'm just gonna have to infuse it in every single example here. But Control Shift and then find a wood texture. Wood. I know I have wood textures. Open. And then you get a wood texture. And there are ways to orient the direction. Right here, rotation 90 degrees. And then sometimes what you have to do is, depending on the orientation, it's a global orientation, so sometimes you have to have 2 materials. If this, now I had this, I'd probably have to create a new material. So just keep that in mind. All right, so that is that shaded. Now we're gonna go to the last one, which is probably the one that's the most out there, I would say, but it's a lot of fun, and I encourage you just to have fun with it. And it's using a similar technique, which is blocks. And I really like blocks. I actually never, before I started this YouTube channel, I had never used blocks. I didn't quite understand the big purpose of it, and someone asked a comment, and I started looking into it and just have fallen in love with blocks. They're so useful, as you can see, in changing lots of elements, maybe getting a project in from another file. There's a lot you can do with blocks. We can get into it later. But with this technique, we're using what's called a module. And so you'll notice, like, if you're making a skin, or if you're making an intricate pavilion, you're gonna want a module that is, it's a repeating element, an identical repeating element that's creating something that's constructing your pavilion or object or screen. So I would typically use this for a screen or a pavilion, that kind of project. What's cool about the module is it's pretty fluid and generative, so we're going to just kind of use it for a wall screen. And the way that we're going to do this is just, okay, let's just make a, and I need to go to shaded view. Let's make a cube, any size, any shape, and then we're going to hit the block. So we're going to create a block, hit the base point, blocks 2. Then we're going to use this what's called a rectangular array. And again, you don't have to use the rectangular array. You could use another one too, but again, it's saying how many multiplications you want. And I'll go hit the right view, hit up. And that's going to kind of preview it, and then press square. Whoa. Then we can double click this, and just whatever your heart desires. You can select this face. You can just have fun with it is really the lesson of the story, the moral of the story. And then you'll notice that you then have this repeating element. So let's actually just do this for a while because it's kind of crazy to do this whole cube thing. So let's just do, never mind, X direction, 0. Oh, 1. X direction 1, Y direction 10, Z direction 10. So that way we can kind of just create a wall. There we go. So kind of like a blank canvas that you're working on. You could say, oh, see how my thing is all messed up, the zooming thing? Again, do that. Now it's better. Okay, so yeah, I can now go, I don't know what happened to my gumball. It's too skinny. Like, okay, well that's not very interesting, but now I can just go here and I could just do like something like this. I don't know why I didn't register that. Shift, press OK. Now it's changed everything. And then double click this, press OK. There we go. That's it. That's all I got for this lesson, and stay tuned for more to come. Next up, we have surfaces. We're going to go into everything involved in surface making, topography, all that good stuff, everything that you need to know. Check it out. Thanks for joining. Welcome to Nate's Studio Desk. I hope you enjoy and learn something, and leave something in the comments and let me know what you would like to see next. Awesome. Have a good day.